Hello, Laurie, Sylla, member of Defeat HIV CAB. We're going to hand over to you, Laurie, to get us started with the introduction to cure.
Okay, great. Well, in keeping with the original question, I am here in Seattle, although originally from New York. So hey to the East Coasters out there. Um, so I'm with the Defeat HIV CAB and the Martin Delaney Towards an HIV Cure Initiative CAB. And today I'm going to provide a brief overview of HIV cure research. I'm going to be moving through these topics rather quickly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at the end. So let's start with, what do we mean when we say a cure for HIV? Most of us think of what is often referred to as a complete cure or a classic cure, simply meaning that HIV would be completely eliminated from the body, and someone who had HIV would no longer have HIV. They would be HIV free. Cure research also includes what is known as ART-free durable suppression, where in the absence of taking HIV medication, often referred to as ART or antiretroviral therapy, HIV remains undetectable, untransmittable, and does not do any ongoing damage to the body. Sometimes this is referred to as a functional cure. It's a term you may hear at the conference or in other scientific presentations. I and a lot of other advocates prefer to avoid the term functional cure, as its meaning is unclear and it's been interpreted in a variety of different ways. Some people believe that it might be easier to achieve this than complete elimination of HIV from the body. Next slide, please. When surveyed or interviewed, people with HIV have been pretty clear about what they want. Not surprisingly, they want a cure they can trust completely, to protect them from disease recurrence, protect their partners from infection, is easy to tolerate, affordable, and that is accessible to people around the globe. Next slide, please. So now that we are in the age of what, to those of us who remember the early days of the epidemic, miraculous treatment, why do we even need a cure? Next slide. First, we need to remember that not everyone has access to this highly effective treatment. For a variety of reasons I don't have time to go into now, despite incredible progress, about a third of people with HIV worldwide still have no access to ART. And the COVID epidemic has shown us just how fragile you guys are going way faster than me. Can you go back to the treatment gap slide? About
Sure,
a
I'm
third
sorry,
of people
Laurie,
with
having some issues with the
auto advance. Okay, well, I can keep talking. About a third, that
sorry.
one. About a third of people with HIV worldwide still have no access to ART. And the COVID epidemic has shown us just how fragile maintaining access to treatment can be. In addition to the impact of lockdowns and interrupted supply chains, we need to remember that most people's access to ART is subsidized, either by government entities or charitable payers, and there's no guarantee that those sources will continue or ever fully meet treatment need. Next slide, please. Additionally, a cure has great symbolic meaning to people with and without HIV. At the 2016 IAS World AIDS Conference in Durban, nearly 250 people who stopped by the Martin Delaney Collaboratory CAB booth at the Global Village answered the question, what would an HIV cure mean to you? After the conference, we turned their answers into this word cloud, and you can see how strongly people associated an HIV cure with freedom, hope, love, relief, and an end to stigma. The bigger the word, the more times it was mentioned in someone's response. Next slide. We need a cure because ART only suppresses HIV as long as people take it. No matter how long someone is on ART, keeping the virus suppressed, HIV comes back quickly if we stop antiretroviral treatment. The red line is showing you what happens to a person's viral load. That's how much HIV is present in their body and replicating when they are on and off of medication. So that drop in the line when people are taking meds is showing that HIV is under control. And then when you take the meds away, the line goes back up because HIV is replicating again. Next slide. Art access, cost, side effects, long-term toxicity, stigma, and chronic inflammation, even when the virus is suppressed, all contribute to the need for a cure. Next slide, please. In spite of viral suppression, chronic inflammation remains a driving force for many health issues that face people living with HIV. People with HIV are more prone to heart attacks, certain cancers, and other comorbidities as they age than those who don't have HIV. Next slide. So why do we think a cure for HIV is possible? Next. This is Timothy Ray Brown. He's also known as the Berlin patient, the first person to be cured of HIV. He is the reason why the HIV cure research field exists. He's the reason we think it's possible. And some of the science of cure right now attempts to copy what happened to him that led him to be cured, but in a way that is safer for people and accessible to them everywhere. A second person, Adam Castillejo, known as the London patient, also appears to be cured of HIV. I don't really have time to go into great detail about their cures, but Timothy was HIV-free for 13 years until he died of a recurrence of his cancer recently, and Adam has been HIV-free for about 3 years, I believe. They both received hematopoietic stem cell transplants, sometimes known as bone marrow transplants, for their life-threatening cancers, with donors whose blood was genetically resistant to HIV, as they lacked a key receptor HIV needs to attach to in order to invade a cell. After their transplants, they essentially grew an HIV-resistant blood supply and became HIV-free. Unfortunately, these kinds of transplants are costly, and more importantly, they're very risky with high mortality rates. Their cures are not scalable, but they are inspirational, and scientists are looking to develop more practical alternatives, some based on modifying the interventions they received. Next slide. Okay, so how do we get from where we are to a cure? Next, please. We need to bear in mind that with all the treatment advances we've made over the past 40 years and are still making, that cure research is now taking place at a time when many people with HIV have access to effective treatment that keeps their HIV under control and that also keeps them from transmitting HIV. Next, please. It's important to understand the research process. New interventions first undergo preclinical testing. That's testing first in a lab and then with animals, and we look for indications of activity and safety. Should an intervention look promising based on these studies, they move into small safety studies in humans, then into larger safety studies, and finally into large-scale efficacy studies to see if the intervention works. You may hear these referred to as phase 1, early safety, phase 2, expanded safety, or phase 3, efficacy trials. Next slide, please. We can think of cure research as including basic science research, clinical trials, testing interventions in people, and importantly, social science and ethics studies as well. Next, please. Here is a typical journey an intervention takes from concept to approval and scale up. You can see as you go down the road, an intervention takes from concept to approval and ultimately scale up. You can see it progressing from preclinical research through the clinical trial phases and then to approval. Post-approval studies are referred to as phase 4, when researchers and product developers continue to collect data after a product is brought to market. Those are usually observational studies where people are reporting still on what has happened. Next slide. Some clinical trials will need to include treatment interruptions. This is to see if the intervention being studied actually keeps HIV from coming back. So your medication is stopped in order to see if there's a response. As there is another presentation about this, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here other than to note that it is an important part of the research process. Next, please. So why is it so difficult to cure HIV? Next. Almost immediately after infection, HIV creates a reservoir where it sneaks inside resting long-lived memory cells. When it hides inside these cells, there are no signals sent to the immune system and they evade detection. It hides in actually very few of these cells, typically in about 1 in a million of them. So these viruses and the cells that hide them are very hard to find. The problem is, should any of these cells become activated or woken up, HIV can come roaring back. Next slide. The reservoir can be found in numerous sites throughout the body. Next, please. So what kind of cures are being pursued? Next, please. There are different strategies that are being explored to achieve ART-free HIV suppression or an eliminating cure. Each of these strategies takes a different approach to the challenge of bringing HIV under control or getting rid of it without ART. Strategies may try to prevent the establishment of the reservoir in the first place. Some try to reduce the reservoir, some try to eliminate it, and some try to strengthen the immune system so it can more effectively wipe out or control HIV. Most likely, we will need some kind of a combination approach, just as we do with treatment. Next slide. So first we have what are called latency reversing agents. This strategy attempts to flush the virus out of the resting cells by awakening the cell and the dormant viruses. This approach is usually accompanied by a second step, which attempts to effectively clear the infected cells and wipe out any virus released. This strategy has sometimes been referred to as kick and kill or shock and kill. More recently, there has been some interest in an opposite approach called block and lock, with the idea of sealing HIV up in the cells they are inhabiting so they can't wake up. Next, please. Cell and gene therapy approaches may involve altering the body's own cells so that they become resistant to HIV, or better, at successfully fighting HIV, or to change the HIV virus itself so it becomes ineffective. You could think of this as using molecular scissors to cut out a portion of the gene and then stitching it back together. While some people are concerned about scalability of cell and gene therapy, rapid advances in the field continue to bring cost and complexity down. Researchers are hoping to one day be able to deliver this kind of treatment as in a single shot, which is a very aspirational goal. Next, please. Broadly neutralizing antibodies, sometimes called BNAbs, are neutralizing antibodies that are effective at killing multiple HIV viral strains. This would be an example of strengthening the immune response. Next, please. There are other strategies designed to boost the immune response as well, including therapeutic vaccines or engineered antibodies. Next, please. Some of you may have heard about CAR T cells from cancer or sickle cell disease, and this strategy is now being explored as an HIV cure strategy. Chimeric antigen T cells, or CAR T cells, are developed from the patient's own blood. They are modified to turn them into precise killing machines. Next, please. There are quite a number of ethical issues that need tending to as the cure research field advances. These include assuring that informed consent is truly informed, that participants and their partners are protected, and that people with HIV around the globe will be able to benefit from curative interventions developed. Next. The difference a safe, effective, accessible cure could have is incalculable. How soon we can have one will be determined by a variety of factors, including investment, research participation, and scientific advances. Next slide. I want to acknowledge my colleagues from the Martin Delaney Towards a Cure initiative who worked on what we call the HIV curriculum module that these slides are from. The curriculum, which is a series of modules about HIV cure, will be coming to a TAG website near you in the coming months. And I'd also like to thank ATAC for their financial support of the curriculum. I have left some time for questions, so I'm happy to answer any questions people have. And we can probably stop the slides.
Great. Thank you, Laurie. That was great. A great brief overview. There was a lot more that you could have gone into. So if you have a question for Laurie, if you want to type it into the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself to speak directly to her, please go ahead. And Danielle, do you have a question that you wanted to ask of Laurie first?
I will check the chat box and see if folks have questions.
Okay. While we're doing that, Laurie, my question to you is, like, how long do you think it's going to take to have a cure? That's what everyone wants to know.
And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that question. Sometimes we get surprises, something that seems like that may be workable, and you run into a stumbling block and things take longer, or sometimes there's a jump in the technology that made something that was impossible before suddenly possible. So it's really hard to say. I would say it's not in the immediate future, and hopefully in our lifetimes. But I think anybody who gives you a concrete number on how long it will be before we have a cure that most people would be able to access, I don't think anybody really has a clue. So.
And
Thank you for that, Laurie.
Yes, go ahead, Danielle.
No, I was going to allow Laurie to finish and then just make a couple comments based on what I'm seeing in the chat and a few pre-curated questions from folks who have emailed in advance. You ready?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's another question that asks, how reliable are injectable treatments?
Okay, well, I want to say I am not a doctor, and the injectable treatments are different than a cure, but what they do is they allow people to go for, at the moment, a month or so. There are some things being worked on that might allow people to go maybe, as long as 6 months without having to take medication, because it's long acting once it's injected. And there are some medications that are looking and approaches that are looking like they may be very, very feasible for people. But I don't think I want to comment outside my expertise beyond that. I can say the data is looking good for them, though.
Absolutely, and thanks for that. Some folks in the chat are hopeful that there will be a cure in their lifetime, and some folks are saying, maybe not. You've overviewed some of the latest advancements in cure. Are there any words that you'd like to offer on some of the latest advancements in treatment, perhaps?
Well, I think that it's going to be interesting, because the line is going to start to get a little bit blurry, perhaps, as we have things like injectables that, if you can go 6 months or a year someday without needing to take medication and just need a periodic injection, some of that technology overlaps with some of the things we're looking at in terms of actual cure. So I think, treatment just keeps getting better and better. The barrier to resistance is higher, and the toxicities are fewer. And many are coming in single pill combinations, and now we've got the long actings. But we need to remember, no matter how long acting a treatment is, HIV is still lurking. So we need something that is qualitatively different than the antiretroviral treatments if we're really going to be talking about cure. I like to think about an eliminating cure, and I think many people around the world do. And those are the kind of cures that that Timothy had, and so I think that they are qualitatively different, and the advances continue to get better, and I think the science will continue to feed each other. Sometimes discovery in one field can lead to discovery elsewhere.
Couldn't agree more. And thank you for that, Laurie. Just a question and follow-up. Some folks believe that there's a cure out there already. How would you respond to that? What say you?
Well, I'd want to know more, like, what do they mean by that, right? Because Timothy has been cured, and and it looks like Alex has been cured. So there are a couple of people who have been cured. So, but if people are thinking that there's a cure that is out there that could work for everybody that's being withheld or denied them, I would say that's not the case. And if there are people claiming to have some kind of an herbal supplement or, some kind of magical potion, some kind of special treatment, those people are promoting something that is simply scientifically unproven, not sound. And please don't be taken in by anybody who's telling you right now, today, that they can cure your HIV, because they can't. And there are people out there who do capitalize on people's hopes, and take people for granted and try to make money. So I would be very careful and very cautious and steer clear of anybody who's offering you a cure.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Laurie.
And this is Richard. If I can chime in here, one of the things that I sort of think about on that question is, if you look at hepatitis C, when the pharmaceutical industry figured out that it was, they were able to develop cures, they went ahead and developed them, and charge a lot of money for them. So I think, I don't think that, to me, it's not really logical to think that there'd be a cure withheld from people, because it's a marketing opportunity for industry, and they've shown that they're very willing to develop and market cures if they can.
Thanks for that, Richard. Thank you.
And people have been claiming they had cures for HIV, since back in the 80s, and it's just untrue.
Definitely. We'll continue to contend with folks' lived reality and their perceptions of availability of a cure as we continue the fight. Just one last question and a brief plug for an opportunity that Michael posted in the chat about our program raffle. So some folks believe that HIV will be cured in our lifetime. However, you mentioned that clinical trials participation is a key part of getting us to an HIV cure. Can you talk about ways, if you know, that folks can get involved in HIV cure research studies?
Well, one good way would be to, is to see, well, is there a study happening near me? I can say the majority of the research right now in HIV cure is still in preclinical phases, but there are clinical studies happening around the globe, and the TAG website, maybe somebody could put their website in the chat. The TAG website has a list of all the cure studies going on around the world, and I believe it indicates if they're open to enrollment. You could correct me if I'm wrong, Richard. And if they're recruiting, and then you can Google those studies and see how to get in touch with those sites. Clinicaltrials.gov in the US has a list of all federally funded clinical trials going on, and you can search for cure. So those might be some ways to do it. Really, if when you participate in a trial, make sure you're clear on what is the intent of the study. A lot of research happening under the name of cure research. The interventions are not yet at a stage where we're looking to see if they're curative. Sometimes we're looking to see, well, what does the body do with this? Sometimes they're looking to see, is the drug safe? Sometimes we're looking to see, is there something we can measure that would be an indicator of activity? So you really want to be very clear about what are you participating in the trial from an altruistic point of view, because it's important to you to be a contribution to the research, versus, oh, I might be cured if I participate in this study. So it's very important that you really understand what you're doing. And it's also really important that people choose to participate if we're going to move the field forward, and to make sure that you're healthy enough to participate as well. But they do screening on entry to trials, and different trials have different entry criteria, and a lot of that is for the participation of the trial participants.
Awesome thing.
I'm sorry, for the protection of trial participants.
No worries. I was gonna chime in on the end, but thank you for that, Laurie, and outstanding presentation as always. We'll entertain any final questions in the chat box, but great point made about the protection of participants and really supporting folks in taking the opportunity to be educated first about trial participation before making an informed decision to participate and what's in the best interest for them and their lived experience. With that said, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat box. Quick snaps for Laurie. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you,
Strong
everybody.
work. Strong work. And then, Michael, if you wanted to chime in about the very thoughtful post you made.
Yes, I forgot to tell everyone before we got started that we will be having a raffle at the end of this session. We are giving away 5 $50 Amazon gift cards. And so we'll give you the details at the end of that, how you can join the raffle, but please do stick around till the end, and you'll get the details for that. We just wanted to reward you all for coming, and so there'll be 5 of them. It's a nice little present, I think. So I wanted to let everyone know about that.
Nice present indeed. And then there's the chat in the box, a chat in the box from Kareem Dubé. The curriculum slides will be posted on the TAG website in June of 2021. So please stay tuned. We look forward to sharing that information with you all.